Daniel had always been drawn to the quiet. He was the kind of man who felt suffocated by the city, the endless thrum of engines, neon lights buzzing outside his window, the chatter of voices that never seemed to stop. He'd tell his coworkers he liked hiking because it was cheap exercise, but the truth was simpler. It was the only place he felt unseen. So when a ranger acquaintance once half-jokingly mentioned an old grove path deep in the state forest, Daniel tucked it away in his memory. The ranger hadn't given directions outright, just a muttered, "Don't bother. The map doesn't show it anymore," followed by a quick subject change. But Daniel had caught the slip, and he was curious. The first miles of trail were ordinary enough. The forest smelled of pine and damp soil, the air sharp with autumn chill. He passed the occasional marker nailed to a tree, orange paint long faded, but by late afternoon even those disappeared. The silence crept in slowly. First the birds stopped, then the insects, until all that remained was the sound of his own boots crunching on pine needles. He pitched his tent near a narrow stream, made a fire and read until the flames burned low. And when sleep came, it came heavy, until the whispers woke him. At first he thought it was the wind in the branches, but the longer he lay still, the more distinct the sound became. Voices, low, urgent, not carried on the breeze but pressed close to his tent walls, sliding along the fabric like fingertips tracing words. His name, Daniel. He sat bolt upright, fumbling for his flashlight. The beam cut through the dark. Nothing. The forest around him was empty still, but the air felt heavier, like something had held its breath the moment he looked. The next day he found it. The grove. The trees gave way suddenly to a perfect circle of bare earth, as though the forest itself had been carved open. No grass, no shrubs. Just soil beaten flat, darker than the ground around it. And in the center, a stone, knee-high, rough, covered in moss. On its surface were markings that seemed too deep to be erosion, but too worn to be words. The whispers returned the moment he stepped inside. Faint at first, then louder. Not drifting, not random. They were surrounding him. Daniel spun in place, scanning the tree line. Everywhere he looked, the shadows between the trunks seemed to deepen. The voices layered on top of each other, dozens of them weaving like a chant, and threaded through them clear as his own heartbeat. "Daniel!" His breath caught. He stumbled backward out of the circle, nearly falling as the whispers cut off instantly. The forest returned to silence. Too silent. That night, he camped far away from the grove, but the voices followed. They began the moment the sun dropped below the horizon. Not soft now, but insistent, like dozens of mouths pressed against his tent. "Daniel, Daniel, Daniel!" He clamped his hands over his ears, shaking, but the voices were inside his head now, circling, scraping, and then footsteps, slow, crunching around his tent, once, twice, 3 full circles before stopping at the entrance flap. He didn't dare unzip it. By the 3rd day, he was unraveling. He tried to backtrack, followed his GPS, retraced his steps, but no matter which direction he walked, he always ended up back at the grove. The circle, the stone, always waiting, the whispers louder each time. His journal entries, later found by search parties, became fragmented. Day 3, I don't think the forest wants me to leave. Day 4, I saw shadows between the trees, faces, dozens of them, all mouthing my name. Day 5, they want me in the circle. I think if I step closer to the stone, they'll stop. Day 6, the stone isn't stone, it's softer now, like skin. The last page was scrawled, almost illegible. If anyone finds this, don't listen. Don't say your name out loud. The trees remember, they won't let you go. When the rangers finally searched, they found his tent shredded, his pack discarded, his boots neatly placed at the edge of the grove. No sign of Daniel. Only the circle, only the stone. And if you stand there long enough to let the silence press into your skull, you might hear it too. The whispers, calling your name. Lily had always loved the forest. Growing up in the suburbs, she used to sneak away into the woods at the edge of town just to sit in the silence. It made her feel grounded, as though the trees themselves were protecting her. So when her friends planned their annual summer camping trip, she was the first to say yes. This year, they picked a site deeper than usual. A small clearing surrounded by tall pines, with just enough room for 3 tents and a fire pit. It was the kind of spot people drove past without noticing. Remote, isolated. Perfect. The first evening passed in laughter. Mark teased her for packing too many snacks. Claire strummed her guitar, badly but enthusiastically. Ethan told ghost stories that made everyone roll their eyes. It felt normal, safe. Until Lily noticed the ground. She was hammering a tent stake when her mallet sank too easily into the dirt. Frowning, she pressed her palm against the soil. It gave slightly, like it was hollow underneath. "Hey," she called, "does this ground feel weird to you?" Mark came over, stomping hard. "Just soft dirt," he said with a grin. "We're not building a house here, it's fine." But when he lifted his boot, Lily swore she saw something round beneath the disturbed soil. Not a rock. Not roots. Something pale. She blinked and it was gone. That night, the forest was alive with insects and owls. The group laughed around the fire until exhaustion sent them to their tents. But Lily lay awake, staring at the nylon ceiling. And then she heard it. Knocking. Soft, deliberate. Coming from directly beneath her tent floor. Her blood went cold. She pressed her ear to the ground. 3 slow taps. She bolted upright, whispering Mark's name, but when he grumbled awake and listened, the forest was silent. "Lily," he groaned, "you're imagining things." But she didn't sleep. Not after that. The second day, she avoided the patch of earth. But she couldn't ignore what she saw that afternoon. While fetching water from the stream, she glanced back at camp and froze. The dirt near her tent was shifting, rising slightly, as though something was pushing upward from below. When she rushed back, it was still. Mark shrugged when she told him. Probably a mole or something. But Lily knew better. Moles didn't knock. Moles didn't whisper. That evening, she confided in Claire. Her friend looked uneasy but tried to laugh it off. "You've just been reading too many creepypastas. Relax." But that night, the noises returned. This time louder. Not just knocking, scratching, like fingernails raking against wood. It circled her tent slowly, dragging. And then came the voice. Faint, muffled. "Help me." Her blood turned to ice. She didn't move until the sky began to lighten with dawn. By the third night, the others couldn't deny it anymore. The noises woke them too. They all sat around the dying fire, clutching mugs of coffee, listening to the ground beneath their feet. The dirt bulged, shifted. A hand broke through. Pale, thin, nails black with soil. It clawed at the air before vanishing again beneath the earth. Mark cursed loudly. Claire screamed. Ethan vomited into the bushes. No one slept that night. At sunrise, they argued. "Pack up, we're leaving," Lily said, voice trembling. But Mark shook his head. "It's just, what, a body? From years ago? It can't hurt us." Claire slapped his arm. "You saw the hand, Mark, that wasn't dead." They agreed to leave the next morning, too shaken to trek back without rest. But by then it was too late. On the 4th night, the ground split open. Not just a hand this time, a face. Gray skin stretched tight across bone, hair matted with dirt. The eyes were sunken but alive, rolling wildly as though desperate to see. Her mouth opened, soil spilling out between cracked lips. "Help me!" Her voice was wet, rasping, clogged with earth. Lily stepped forward before she realized what she was doing. her body moving without permission. But then she saw the woman's eyes. Not pleading. Hungry. Rage burning behind them. The group bolted. They didn't stop to grab their gear. Didn't stop to argue. Branches whipped their faces as they tore through the forest, guided only by moonlight and sheer terror. Behind them, the ground cracked and split. Dozens of pale arms reaching up through the soil, grasping, clawing, pulling at the earth as if trying to climb free. And threaded through the chaos came the voices. Whispers, hisses, cries. Stay, stay, stay with us. When the rangers found the abandoned camp days later, the tents were shredded. The gear was scattered, and the patch of soil in the center of the clearing was soft and freshly turned. They wrote it off as a bear attack, but locals knew better. They never camped there, because if you sleep on that earth long enough, the woman beneath the soil will knock. And if you answer, she won't be alone anymore. Chris had been the one to suggest the hike. Every summer, he and 3 friends, Jacob, Claire, and Ethan, tried to meet up for a weekend outdoors. It was their tradition, a way of staying connected after college. They'd done lakes, mountains, even a desert trip. This year, Jacob wanted something different. I heard about this trail from an old hunter, he said. Not on any map, supposed to be beautiful. Claire frowned. If it's not on a map, maybe it's not safe. But Jacob grinned. Come on, what's the worst that could happen? It's just a forest. The trailhead was marked only by a crooked wooden post with faded paint, half buried in weeds. The air was cooler here, the canopy thicker. It felt untouched. Chris adjusted his pack and led the way. The first hours were ordinary enough. The crunch of boots on soil, birdsong echoing above, sunlight filtering through pines. They joked, shared snacks, and pointed out odd mushrooms along the path. It felt like any other hike, until the first clearing. It was circular, bare earth ringed by dense ferns. No trees inside, no brush, just dirt. They paused, puzzled. Strange, Claire muttered, almost like someone cleared it. They crossed quickly, unsettled by the unnatural symmetry. 20 minutes later, they found another clearing. Identical. Same size, same bare ground, same ring of ferns. Ethan laughed nervously. What, déjà vu already? But Chris's stomach tightened. He marked the dirt with a long stick, scratching an X before moving on. The day stretched long. Every turn, every climb, every descent, the forest offered no variation. And each time they broke through the trees, there it was. The clearing. The same circle, the same silence. And soon Chris noticed something worse. The X he carved into the dirt was still there. They hadn't found new clearings. They had found the same one, over and over. Frustration boiled. Jacob insisted they were missing side trails. Claire suggested backtracking. Ethan sat in the dirt, refusing to move until someone explained. Chris tried to stay calm, but dread gnawed at him. He led them carefully, marking trees with broken branches, even tying a strip of his red bandana to one trunk. But no matter how far they walked, no matter which direction they chose, they always came back. To the clearing. The same red cloth fluttering weakly in the breeze. Night fell faster than expected. The temperature dropped, and the forest grew heavy with shadows. They built a fire in the clearing, huddling close. The circle of flame gave some comfort, but Chris couldn't shake the feeling that the trees leaned closer as darkness deepened. Nobody slept much. He woke more than once to the sound of footsteps. Not boots, not animals, but something softer, circling just beyond the tree line. When he shined his flashlight, nothing was there. But the forest never felt empty. The second day was worse. They walked until blisters tore their feet, until their water ran low. The forest gave them nothing. No streams, no landmarks, just endless green walls funneling them back to the circle. Claire broke down crying. Jacob cursed and kicked at the earth, screaming that it was a prank, that someone was doing this to them. Ethan stopped speaking altogether, his face pale, his eyes darting to the tree line whenever the wind stirred. At night, the whispers began. Soft, almost like leaves rustling, but too deliberate. The group froze, listening. The sound threaded through the branches, circling them. And then Chris heard it clearly, his name. "Chris," Claire gasped, because she heard hers too. One by one, each of their names floated from the dark, overlapping, repeating, like dozens of mouths murmuring at once. By the third morning, they were broken, food nearly gone, throats dry. They trudged forward in silence, hope dwindling. And when they stumbled into the clearing again, despair swallowed them, because this time it wasn't empty. 4 figures stood at the far edge, silent. Still, each one was a perfect copy. Chris saw himself. Same clothes, same torn pack strap, same sweat-streaked face. The others stared at their own doubles. They didn't move, didn't blink. They only smiled, wide black-eyed smiles. Jacob snapped first. He grabbed a branch and charged, screaming. But the figures melted back into the trees, vanishing soundlessly. When he turned back, panting, the clearing was empty. But the fire pit they'd built on the first night was still smoking faintly, as if they'd never left, as if they had always been there. That night, no one spoke. They sat by the fire, hollow-eyed, waiting. The whispers returned, louder. This time they came from within the clearing, just beyond the circle of firelight. And when Chris glanced up, he saw them again. The doubles, standing just beyond the glow. Dozens of them now. All smiling, all watching. The final journal entry, later found by searchers, was written in Claire's shaky handwriting. "We can't escape. Every path leads back." They're waiting at the edge now, closer each night. I don't know if we're walking at all or if we've been here forever. I think when we sleep, they'll step into the clearing. Maybe they already have. Maybe we are them. The rangers who searched weeks later found no bodies, no packs, no trace of the 4 friends. Only a small fire pit in a circular clearing. The dirt was covered in footprints, circling, over and over. And some swear, if you stand there long enough, you'll see them too. Figures in the tree line, smiling, waiting for you to join the loop. Evan had camped before, a dozen times, maybe more. He wasn't a survivalist by any means, but he knew how to pitch a tent, light a fire, and cook noodles over a little gas stove. This trip was supposed to be his reset, his chance to get away from the office grind, away from the constant pings of emails and texts. 3 nights in the forest, no cell service, no people, just quiet. But quiet wasn't what he found. On the first night, the forest seemed ordinary. The stars burned clear through the canopy. The air was crisp and cold enough to sting his lungs. He ate dinner by the fire and sat back against a log, listening to crickets and distant owls. And then, from between the pines, he noticed it, a faint glow. At first he thought it was fireflies, but the light was too steady, too smooth. It bobbed between the trees in a rhythm, like someone carrying a lantern. It swayed closer, then further, then stopped. Evan narrowed his eyes. Maybe it was another camper, or a ranger doing night rounds. But when he stood to call out, the glow vanished, as if it had never been there. He sat for hours, staring into the dark until the fire burned low. The second night, it returned. This time closer. The glow drifted between the trunks in slow, deliberate arcs like someone pacing. He stepped toward the tree line, flashlight trembling in his grip. "Hello?" he called, voice cracking. The glow bobbed once more as though in answer, and then slid out of sight behind a tree. Evan swung the flashlight beam, nothing. But when he turned it off, the lantern returned, hovering just beyond reach. Watching, he zipped himself into his tent, heart racing. He didn't sleep until dawn. By the third day, paranoia gnawed at him. He hiked miles in every direction, searching for signs of life, a footprint, a candy wrapper, anything. But there was nothing. No people, no trails, no animals. Only endless forest. By nightfall, he was exhausted. But the glow came anyway. This time, it circled the camp. He could see it drifting left to right, bobbing in smooth arcs, always just far enough to blur. Every time he shined his flashlight, it disappeared. Every time he turned it off, it returned. Closer, patient, relentless. The fourth night was worse. Evan tried to hide in his tent, hands pressed over his ears, eyes shut tight. But the glow bled through the fabric. Shadows flickered against the walls as footsteps crunched outside. Slow, deliberate. He held his breath, praying it would pass. But then it stopped. Right outside his tent, a warped silhouette stretched across the nylon. A tall figure, holding the lantern. The voice came next. Low, ragged, too close. "You're going the wrong way." Evan's veins turned to ice. He didn't move, didn't breathe. The voice rasped again, almost gentle. "Follow me." He couldn't stay. At dawn, he packed his gear, strapped on his boots, and picked a direction. He walked until his legs burned, until sweat soaked his shirt, until the sun dipped low again. And when he broke through the trees into a clearing, his chest collapsed. His tent, his fire pit, the same camp, as if he had never left. At the tree line, the lantern swayed, waiting. On the fifth night, he stopped pretending it was human. The glow never wavered, never dimmed. When he looked closely, he realized there was no flame, no flicker. Just cold, steady light, bobbing in a rhythm that didn't belong to a hand. The voice came again, threading through the fabric of his tent. "Follow me." This time softer, almost kind, almost pleading. But beneath the softness, Evan heard something else. Teeth, grinding, clicking, hungry. The sixth night, the glow didn't wait. It pressed against the edge of the clearing, then the middle, then inches from his fire. When he dared peek from his tent, he saw it clearly for the first time. A figure holding the lantern, too tall, its limbs long and thin as branches, joints bent the wrong way. Its head was bowed, face hidden in shadow, but when it moved, the lantern didn't swing. It floated, locked in perfect rhythm with its steps. Evan screamed until his throat tore raw, shining his flashlight in its direction. The figure melted into the trees, but the glow stayed, hovering, closer than ever. By the seventh day, Evan was delirious. He scratched words into his journal, scrawled drawings of the lantern, the figure, the endless loop of trees. He wrote one phrase again and again. "It knows my name." Searchers found his camp weeks later. The tent was slashed, the gear scattered. The journal was half buried in the dirt, pages smeared with frantic writing. No trace of Evan remained. But some nights deep in the forest, campers still report seeing a faint glow weaving between the pines, a lantern light bobbing patiently, and if you listen closely, you might hear a whisper, low, urgent, "Follow me." Jason had hunted in these woods his whole life. He knew the smell of pine resin and damp soil, the way fog clung low in October mornings, the hush that blanketed the forest when snow threatened to fall. He knew what silence meant too. But the silence he and Matt found that year wasn't the usual kind. It was heavy, unnatural, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. They'd hiked in early, rifles slung over their backs, joking the whole way. The plan was to spend 2 nights out there, hunt during the day, camp at night, then head back with venison for the freezer. By late afternoon, Jason felt the stillness settle over them. No birds, no squirrels, not even the wind through the branches. It was then that Jason froze mid-step. "Matt," he whispered, pointing. There, just beyond the tree line, was a figure, tall, motionless, watching. At first, Jason thought it was another hunter, but the longer he stared, the stranger it felt. The figure didn't shift its weight, didn't fidget, didn't move at all. It just stood there, part of the mist, perfectly still. When Jason finally blinked, it was gone. Slipped soundlessly back into the woods. Another hunter, Matt said quickly, but his eyes were tight, probably keeping his distance. Jason wanted to believe him, but hunters moved. Hunters made noise. This didn't. That night, they camped in a small clearing. The fire cast long, nervous shadows across the trees. Matt tried to laugh it off, but Jason noticed him glancing at the tree line every few minutes. He was doing the same. And then when the fire popped, Jason saw it again. At the edge of the clearing. Still, watching. "Hey!" Matt shouted, standing with his rifle. "Who's there?" The figure didn't answer, didn't move. It only stared. Jason gripped his own gun, but some instinct told him not to raise it. Not yet. A gust of wind sent embers swirling, and for a split second the shadows shifted. When they settled, the figure was gone. Neither of them slept much. Every crack in the dark set them upright, rifles shaking in their hands. But the forest gave them nothing, only silence. The next day they tried to shake it off. They walked deeper, tracking deer, forcing jokes, pretending nothing was wrong. But Jason saw it again, in the mist, on a ridge above them, always the same distance away. Watching, he nudged Matt, who cursed under his breath. They quickened their pace. But no matter how far they walked, no matter how many ridges or gullies they crossed, the figure was always there. Always at the edge, always watching. By the second night, their nerves were raw. The fire felt too small, the clearing too exposed. They kept their backs to the flames, eyes scanning the dark. And then Matt swore he saw two of them. One to the left, one to the right. Both still. Both silent. Both watching. Jason turned the flashlight beam, but it caught nothing. When the light snapped off, the figures were gone, but the feeling remained. Eyes everywhere. By the third day, panic crept in. They decided to cut the trip short. Pack up, head home. But the forest fought them. Every direction looked the same. The trails blurred. The compass spun uselessly, needle twitching as though confused. And still, the watcher followed. Jason caught glimpses through the scope of his rifle. Just an outline blurred by mist. But when he blinked, it was gone. That night, Matt snapped. He stood at the tree line, rifle raised, shouting into the dark. "I know you're there, show yourself!" The forest swallowed his voice. Jason begged him to sit down, but Matt kept screaming until his throat went raw. When he finally stopped, the silence was deafening. And then Jason saw it. Not at the tree line this time. On the trail. Closer. Unmoving. Watching. Matt raised his rifle, finger trembling on the trigger. But Jason grabbed his arm. "Don't," he whispered. Something deep inside him knew, if they shot, they wouldn't leave the forest alive. They backed away slowly, never turning their backs. When they looked again, the figure was gone. On the fourth morning, they finally stumbled onto a logging road. Their relief was so sharp it made Jason's knees weak. They hurried back to their truck, tossing gear in without care, slamming doors shut. Neither spoke on the drive home. But Jason didn't leave it behind. That night, lying in bed, he glanced out his window and froze. At the edge of his yard, just beyond the trees, stood a figure. Tall, still, silent, watching. If you made it this far, thank you for spending your night with us. If these stories gave you chills, there's plenty more waiting. Don't forget to subscribe to Night Fear Stories for new terrifying tales every single night. Sleep well, if you can.